right. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Again, I'm Natasha, International Student Advisor, Regulated Canadian Immigration Consultant with the Internationalization Office. Myself, along with my two other colleagues who are joined here today, Arif and Denai, make up the Immigration Advising Team. So we're the team here at Memorial who will help to answer any question you have about your status as an international student. So I'm going to hand it on over to Denai, who is going to deliver the first part of our presentation. And Reef will jump in from time to time, and then I'll be speaking with you again. So Denai.
Hello, everybody. My name is Denai Belanger. I am also a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. So my job and Natasha and Ari's job is to provide you with immigration advice. Our services are free. So if you have any questions about getting a study permit, visa, any of that, you can come and speak to us. The presentation today is going to be divided into three parts. We're going to talk a little bit about some immigration documents. We'll have a little bit of a quiz going on just to generate some fun, and then we'll have a question and answer period. So before we begin, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. So this is something that you may hear a lot during your time at Memorial. Why do we do this? So land acknowledgements are really a way for us as an institution to recognize the terrible history that Canada and even our province has had with Indigenous people in Canada. Land acknowledgements are a way for us to keep the conversation going about all of the terrible atrocities that happened in our country, but also to educate people who may not know what did happen to our Indigenous communities in our province, but also a way for us to keep us accountable. And so I'd like to acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups. And we acknowledge respectfully the histories and cultures of these people, the Beothuk, the Mi'kmaq, the Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone here today to reflect on the lands where they are currently located, as well as the Indigenous people for whom these lands are traditional territory. And I also encourage you that when you get to St. John's or Corner Brook or wherever it is you're going, that you take some time to learn a little bit more about our history and to ask questions about our history with Indigenous people. Okay, so at the end of this presentation, what are you going to learn? You're going to be able to describe the difference between our different immigration documents. So for example, visas and study permits and passports and all those sorts of things. You'll also be able to describe how your enrollment status impacts your legal eligibility here in Canada. So your eligibility to work and your eligibility to study. You'll also be able to define some key terms that we use at Memorial for immigration purposes. You'll be able to describe your eligibility for things like the co-op work permit, as well as the post-graduation work permit. You'll be able to identify 3 sources to find out more about your immigration documents or to get just general immigration advice. And then lastly, you should be able by the end of this presentation to identify at least one way that you can get in contact with us. Okay, so let's begin. So your passport is your most important primary document. So what does that mean? Your passport is a document that is issued by your government that allows you to travel outside of your country. So for some people, they can just take that passport and travel the world, but other people will need additional documents to be able to travel to Canada. Now, your passport is very important because all of your other residence documents in Canada are based on your passport's eligibility. So if your passport is going to expire, you want to make sure that you get a new passport before you apply for a study permit or before it's time to extend your other documents. Usually, your study permit is not going to be issued past your passport validity. So if your passport is going to expire halfway through your program or partway through your program, you will have to get a new passport first before you can extend your study permits. Now, once you come to Canada, you may be able to extend your passport without having to leave the country. So depending on your government and the rules about getting passports, you may be able to submit an application to a embassy, consulate, or high commission, or you may have to travel to an embassy, consulate, or high commission, or you may have to travel back to your home country to get a passport. Most embassies and most foreign missions are located in the capital city, which is Ottawa. Ottawa is in Ontario, which is very far away from us. So if you do have to go to Ottawa, you will likely have to fly there. Sometimes your government may have like a consulate close by, so in Halifax. Sometimes even they might even be in St. John's, or they may come to St. John's. If that happens, we will try and notify you. But because our area of expertise is Canada, we can only offer limited advice for your passport. In Canada, you don't have to carry proof of your status with you all the time. So you don't have to carry like your study permit with you. And please don't do that. Don't carry your study permit or your passport with you. If you want a form of identification, you can carry a government issued ID like a Newfoundland ID, or if you're getting a driver's license, you can get a Newfoundland driver's license. You can also carry your student card, but you will need some form of government ID if you're going to do things like buy alcohol or marijuana, or go into a place that is age restricted. So if you have questions about that, you can always come and chat with somebody in our office, and we can tell you how to get a Newfoundland ID. Okay, so the next important document is something called a temporary resident visa, or a TRV. Sometimes you may hear us refer to it as a visa. So a visa is a sticker that is put in your passport by the Canadian visa office that serves your region. And this document allows you to travel to Canada and request permission to enter. So the last part of that is important. A visa or a TRV doesn't automatically allow you to enter. You still have to request permission to enter Canada, which means that you still need to meet the requirements to enter the country. Now, not everybody needs a TRV, but if your country does require one, then when you apply for your study permit, your visa office will give you one automatically. So when you get your first study permit, when you apply, you'll get your TRV. Now, as I said, not everybody requires this, but most people will need this document plus their study permit to enter Canada. So what is the purpose of this? Like I said, the purpose of this is just to enter Canada. The TRV does not allow you to remain in Canada past a certain time to study or work or anything. It's just used for entry. And once you have entered Canada, it's served its purpose. However, if you do leave, so if you go home on winter break or midterm break or anything like that, you can use it again if it is a multiple entry visa to re-enter Canada. There are some cases where you can travel to the United States, the continental United States, without a valid TRV, as long as you have a valid study permit. Now, if you are part of that group that doesn't need a TRV, then you will be issued with something else called an electronic travel authorization, or an ETA. So you have to go onto the IRCC website to determine which of the two you're going to get, okay? An ETA serves the same purpose, but instead of it being a sticker on your passport, it's electronic. It's in your virtual profile with IRCC, so you don't actually see it. But both of those documents are essentially the same thing. They allow you to travel to Canada and request permission to enter the country. If this document expires, but you still have a valid study permit, it's okay because it's only used to enter Canada. But the next document I'm going to talk about, the study permit. Oh, okay. We're going to have a quiz and then we'll talk about the study permit. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Arif, who is going to test you a little bit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Arif Abu. My pronouns are he and they, and I want to recognize that I'm a migrant settler in St. John's, which is the ancestral homeland of Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. And as you know, the FIFA World Cup just ended, and I don't know who you were supporting. I was not supporting Argentina because my sisters love Argentina, so I had to go against my sisters as a sibling rivalry. But we will play this true and false in FIFA style. So in the chat, I will give you a statement. I will read a statement, and you have to wait for my statement to finish. And once I finish my statement, you have to say, is it true or false? And in the bracket, you have to also mention the name of your country. And the countries who answered it correctly the first gets the score. Okay, and then later on we will tally it together and announce the country who has won the test. So all of you get ready. We will start in 1, 2, and 3. So visa is an official counterfoil document issued by a visa office abroad that is placed in a person's passport to show that he or she has met the requirements for admission to Canada as a temporary resident, a visitor, student, or worker. Is it true or false? Ghana, true. Let's see. Anybody disagrees? True. Nigeria, true. Iran. Okay. The answer is true. So the first goal goes to Ghana. Okay, it's time for Africa. Next one, a question. You can enter Canada with an expired TRV. True or false?
Requires citation, number one citation, and that one there is.
Yeah, so Iran has answered it correctly. It's false. You cannot enter Canada with an expired TRV, except one situation. So if you have a valid study permit of Canada, but your visa has expired, and you have a valid visa to go to USA, and if you go to USA and come back, then you do not need to have a valid Canadian visa to enter Canada. However, if you go to a third country, for example, if you go to USA and then you go to Mexico and then come back to USA and try to enter Canada, in that case, you will not be able to do so. So there's a slight difference in that answer. Next one is visa authorizes international students to work on or off campus. True or false? Ruth is correct. Visa authorizes international students to work on or off campus. It's not true. It's your study permit that authorizes you to work on and off campus. So Ghana 2, Iran 1. Final question for this round. Visa can be renewed from within Canada. True or false? True. Correct. Ghana is just killing it today. So Ghana 3, Iran 1. And there are quite a few chances you will have to win and take the trophy to your country. Okay.
All right. That was great. You guys are catching on really quickly. Okay, so the next document that we want to talk about is a study permit. So in Canada, we have visas and permits. So visas are used to like enter Canada, and permits are used to remain in Canada and to do something. So a study permit allows you to remain in Canada and study. A work permit allows you to remain in Canada and work, etc., etc. So your study permit is your next most important document because it allows you to legally remain in Canada and be a student. Your study permit will look like this. So if you haven't entered Canada yet, you probably don't have your study permit. You will receive your study permit when you go through immigration at your port of entry. So whether that's the airport or a land border. The study permit is issued based on your application that you do in the visa office, and it has some important information on it. It will have your personal information like your name, your date of birth, your gender, and your country of citizenship. And then it will have some important information about your study. So it will specify how long the document is valid until. So we use the term valid to mean that a document is not expired, that it still has validity on it. So when you get your study permit, you're going to see how long the document is valid until. In most cases, your study permit will be issued up until the end of your program. So if in your application, you said that you were doing a 4-year program, your study permit and hopefully your visa will be valid for the same 4 years. Sometimes immigration officers don't give you the full time, and that could be for a number of reasons. Either your passport is expiring, or they just make the decision to give you a shorter period. We don't always know why this happens, but if that happens, it's not a big deal. You can always apply to extend your study permit while you are still inside Canada. So you don't have to go home and get a new study permit and go through the same process. You can do it from inside Canada. It's very easy. You apply online, and you can come and speak to one of us and we can help you with your application. Your study permit will also have something called conditions. Now, the conditions are also important because they tell you what you can and cannot do with your study permit. The most important thing that I'm sure all of you are looking for are whether or not you can work in Canada. So your study permit will tell you if you are able to work in Canada, and any other conditions of that work. So sometimes it may say that you can work, but you cannot work in a certain field. So when you get your study permit at the airport, make sure that you look at it. Check your name, check your date of birth, check all the information to make sure that it is correct, because it's a bit of a hassle to change once you've left the secure area of the airport. So don't leave the immigration section until you've reviewed all the information on your study permit. If you have questions, you can always ask them, what does this mean? And they'll be able to explain it to you. The other thing is, please do not leave the airport before you get your study permit. So once you come to Canada, the very first airport that you go to is where you will get your study permit. Do not try and make your connection until you have your study permit. You can miss your connecting flight to St. John's, that's fine, but you cannot leave the airport until you get this document. Because if you don't get your study permit when you first arrive, you have to leave the country to get your permit again. So make sure you're in the airport, get your study permit. If you have questions, ask the immigration officer if you have those questions. Immigration officers in Canada are generally very nice, so you don't have to worry about, not being able to ask them questions. So your study permit allows you to work. It should have the information on there. Don't leave the airport until you have reviewed all of the information. Okay, next slide.
Okay, now remember Ghana is winning and Ghana is killing it. So Ghana is 2 and Nigeria is 1, correct, Danai? Yeah. So now let's start again. So do not answer before I finish my sentence, because if you do that, I will give you a yellow card. And if you do it twice, then you will get a red card. Without further delay, let's play. 1, 2, 3. Study permit allows you to enter Canada. True or false? False Nigeria, false Peru, Sri Lanka is true. It is false. Study permit does not allow you to enter Canada, except, as I explained in the last quiz, if you are going to the United States and if you have a valid study permit. But if you do not go to a third country, you just go to USA and coming back, then you can use the study permit to enter Canada. But otherwise, you will always need a valid visa to enter Canada if you're from a valid visa country. And if you're from an ATA country, then you will need a valid ATA to enter Canada. Next question, so Nigeria won. Nigeria won. Next one is study permit authorizes you to work if you meet the conditions. True or false? Peru says true. Nigeria says true. The answer is true. So Peru scored 1. Congratulations, Peru. Yes, study permit authorizes you to work if you meet the conditions. And study permit may also restrict you from working as well. And if your study permit restricts you from working, and if you think that you should be eligible to work, then please connect with us and we can look into that. Last question is, study permit cannot be renewed from within Canada. True or false? Nigeria says false. Ghana says false. Yes, it is false. Study permit can be renewed from within Canada. It cannot be renewed from outside of Canada. It can always be renewed from within Canada. In fact, if you know that your study permit is expiring,
Oh, we've lost your sound, Arif.
sorry. So study permit can be renewed from within Canada. Is correct. I think this round was won by Nigeria, and Nigeria 2, Peru 1. We also have Ghana 2 from the last round, and Iran 1. So people who are not scoring, I'm particularly talking to my people, Bangladeshi students. As you may know that, I was born in Bangladesh. Let's see some scores from them as well. Waiting for the quiz number 3.
All right, so I want to move on to some of the terms or the language that you'll hear as a student and what that means in terms of your immigration status. So the first term that you'll hear is academic year. An academic year in Canada is usually from September to August. So right now we are in January. We're kind of, 1/3 into the academic year. So the academic year is different from the calendar year. So the calendar year begins in January for most of the world, but the academic year in Canada begins in September. The next term that you'll hear is something called full-time status. So full-time is something that is determined by your institution. So at Memorial, if you are an undergraduate student, full-time means that you are taking at least 3 courses or 9 credits per semester. So if you're taking 3 courses or more, so 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6, then you are considered full-time. If you are taking less than 3, so you're taking 1 or 2 courses or 3 or 6 credits, then you are considered part-time if you're an undergraduate student. For graduate students, full-time is based on your tuition fee status. So if you are paying the full-time tuition fee, it doesn't matter how many courses you are taking in that semester, you are considered full-time. For graduate students, your full-time status is not based on number of courses. It's based on your tuition plan. So whether you're paying full-time or part-time, it doesn't matter how many courses you take. Undergraduates, your full-time status is based on taking 3 courses or more. And for the most part, graduate students are expected to be full-time. So it's very rare that you would go into part-time status. And if you are going to be a part-time student for whatever reason, please, please, please come and speak to an immigration advisor right away, because there are some implications to that that can affect things like whether you can work, whether you can apply for future immigration documents. The next term that you will hear is something called scheduled break. So a scheduled break means a break either between semesters or within the semester. It is a break that is visible on our academic calendar and it applies to mostly everyone. Graduate students, unfortunately, because you are expected to have continuous enrollment, you do not have breaks. So undergraduate students can have breaks, scheduled breaks that are in our academic calendar. Graduate students, you don't really have breaks, unfortunately. The next term is leave of absence. Leave of absence just means that you have requested formal permission to take time away from your studies. So you have a letter from your department or faculty, something that says, we know that you're not going to be registered. That's okay. You can come back. This is very important if you are planning to take any sort of break. So for example, if you have to go and do military service, if you have a health problem and you have to return to your home country for treatment, if you are applying for maternity leave or paternity leave, anything like that, you need to have permission to do that. So come and see us if you're in that situation. And then the last one is academic suspension. So academic suspension happens when you are unsuccessful in, I believe, 2 consecutive terms, and then you're asked to, withdraw from the university for a period of time. So a suspension could be 1 semester, it could be a whole academic year. But if you are in that situation, again, you need to come and see us as soon as possible because we need to explain what that means for your immigration status in Canada. Okay, next slide. So here are some other things that you need to know as a study permit holder. The first and most important thing, and I always say to students, if you forget everything else we've said to you today, that's totally fine, but do not forget this, and that is don't let your study permit expire. Okay, it's not a good thing if your study permit expires, because if it does expire, then you have to stop studying until you fix your situation. And if you stop studying, it also means that you cannot work. And if that happens partway through the semester, then you have a break in your studies, and that is not good. So do not let your study permit expire. You can come and see us 3 to 6 months before your study permit expires to get instructions on how to extend it. So as long as you apply to extend your study permit before it expires, then you have something called maintained status, which means that you can remain in Canada and you can study and work as normal. But you have to submit your application before it expires. The other thing that students don't realize is that the expiry date of your study permit is the actual date on the permit. So if it says December 31st, then December 31st is the day that your status expired. So you have until December 30th to extend your application. Now, we don't recommend that you wait that late. You should be looking at extending your study permit well before that. Okay? Now, what happens when it expires? If your study permit expires, then you are considered to be out of status, which means that you don't have legal status in Canada, and that's not great. So when you are in that out of status period, you want to make sure that you restore your status. So you can still do that from inside Canada if your documents expired within 90 days. So if we go back to that December 31st example, if you discover that your study permit expired in like February or even before March 31st, you're good because you're still within that 90-day period. So you can remain in Canada, you can apply for your study permit, you just can't study or work because you're now out of status. But if you had applied to extend your study permit before December 31st, then you could remain in Canada and continue studying and continue working with no problem. When you apply to restore your status, you have to pay a penalty. You have to pay for the application, and you have to wait until you get the new permit in the mail before you can go back to school. So depending on the time of year, it could be as little as 3 months, 6 months, or even a year waiting for your study permit. And that's not good. So we want to make sure that you are never in that situation, that you apply for your documents well before they expire. So 3 to 6 months before they expire. Okay. The other thing that you need to remember is that when you complete your program, so not when you go to convocation and have your ceremony, but from the last date that you complete your program, that you see all your final grades, your study permit becomes invalid after 90 days. So 90 days after you meet your program requirements, it doesn't matter if your study permit is unexpired. 90 days after you complete your program, your study permit is no longer a valid document. And we will talk more about that later on. The other thing is that you need to be sure that you are actively pursuing your studies. So actively pursuing your studies is a legal term. It means that you are continuing to register, that you are making every effort to register full-time when you are expected to register full-time, and that you are trying to complete your program in a timely manner. So what does this mean? It means that for undergraduate students, you are making every effort to be full-time and registered in the fall semester and the winter semester. So that's between September and April. You are registering full-time, you're taking 3 or more courses, you are trying to complete your program in a timely manner. And of course, for grad students, it just means that you are continuously enrolled, which you are required to do. Now, if you have to take a break, then you need to ensure that you have a good reason to take that break. Now, undergraduate students, you're lucky because you get the summer off. And you'll notice that in Canada, most students don't want to register in the summer because it's the only time the weather is really nice. So they want to be outside and they want to travel and do all amazing things. So undergraduate students, you don't have to register in the summer. You can if you want to, but it's not required. You are expected to register in the fall and in the winter. Undergraduate students, unfortunately, you're expected to register all the time. The next thing is read the conditions of your study permit. I already talked about this. Before you leave the airport, if there's something you don't understand, ask the issuing officer, the immigration officer, if you have questions. If you don't have time, you can always come to our office and say, I don't understand what this means. Can you tell us what this means? It's very important that you do that because you don't want to be in violation of the conditions on your permit. Okay, next slide. And then your study permit, as I mentioned before, is the document that tells you whether or not you can work in Canada. But you still need to meet the employment conditions. So you need to be a full-time student. So you need to be taking 3 or more courses. If you're undergraduate, you need to be paying the full-time tuition fee if you're a graduate student. You are limited to the number of hours that you can work, although depending on your situation, you may be eligible for the new temporary public policy that allows you to work as many hours as you want to. Natasha is going to talk a little bit more about that, but in most cases, international students are limited to the number of hours they can work. The next thing is that in order to work in Canada, you need something called a social insurance number or a SIN number in addition to a study permit that says that you can work. The social insurance number is like government DNA. It tells the government the type of worker you are, your age, and whether or not you are eligible for certain taxes, tax credits or benefits. So when you file taxes, which is another information session that's coming, you will need the social insurance number to be able to work. Your employer will ask you for this number because this is how you will get paid, right? They need that number to report how much taxes they're taking from your salary. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, I'm going to pass this on to Natasha, who is going to talk a little bit more about that temporary policy that allows students to work more hours.
Great. Thank you so much, Denai. Yeah, so I think, work authorization is one of those aspects of your study permit, which can be a bit complicated, right? So it's important to note that, it's all your work authorization is tied to your study permit, and they treat on-campus work and off-campus work separately. Okay, so in order to be eligible to work on or off campus, you have to be a full-time student. Immigration Canada does not restrict the number of hours you can work on campus, but they do restrict the number of hours you can work off campus, as Denai has just explained. So generally, it's 20 hours a week during a regular semester, but possibly you can work full-time during a scheduled break as long as you were a full-time student before and after the break. So those are the normal regulations. But what we've seen introduced recently is something we call a temporary public policy. This is a policy that's introduced by IRCC for a temporary period of time, right? And this temporary public policy is about removing the restrictions of the 20 hours. So basically saying, just like there's no limit on on-campus work hours, there's not going to be any limit on off-campus work hours, but only for a particular group of study permit holders who are eligible under this temporary public policy. So it's a mistake to assume that because you have a study permit, because you're a full-time student and you were authorized to work before, that you are going to be able to take advantage of this temporary public policy, because that's not the case. You actually have to be eligible to qualify for it. Now, as a bit of background, this temporary public policy was announced on October 7th, 2022, and it's in effect from November 15th, 2022 until December 31st of 2023. And as we mentioned, you have to be eligible to qualify for this temporary public policy. And whether or not you're eligible depends on a number of factors. And one is when you applied for your study permit, right? So basically, as long as you applied for your study permit before October 7th of 2022, then you might be eligible. The other thing is the study permit that you're issued, and it gets issued at the port of entry, it has to have the condition on it that says may work on or off campus if eligible. So that's another thing you have to consider to see if you're eligible for this temporary public policy. And the last thing you need to know is for how long you're eligible for this temporary public policy. So it's in effect until December 31st, 2023, but if your study permit happens to expire before that time, then you're not going to be eligible for the full duration of this temporary public policy. Okay, so you have to ensure that the study permit you hold you applied for before October 7th, that it includes the condition that authorizes you to work, and to determine if you're eligible for the full duration of the temporary public policy, you need to take into consideration the expiry date of your study permit. If it expires before December 31st, 2023, then you're not going to be eligible for the full temporary public policy. We would encourage you to attend the Immigration Advising Team's virtual immigration information session on study permits and work. So one thing we do is we host regular sessions. This session is, for new students as part of your new student orientation, but for all students, new and returning students, we host regular information sessions every Tuesday and Thursday in Brightspace. And Brightspace is the online course platform. So we have a course shell in there called Immigration Support for International Students, which if you're registered in Winter, you should see when you log into online.mun.ca. And you can see our schedule on our website. You can see it when you log into Brightspace, but we'd encourage you to attend that session as well. So it's important to have a good understanding, and if you're ever in doubt about whether you're eligible for this temporary public policy or what your work hour restrictions could be, do connect with us. And there's lots of ways to do that, through appointments, through email, through these information sessions. So if you need to be sure so that you're not violating any immigration policy, right, which could really get you into trouble. So we are there to help you understand it. The other thing I would say about this is that even if you are eligible under this temporary public policy measure, you should consider two additional factors. One is, how does that line up with any work restrictions that might be placed on you through the institution, right? So Memorial University has policies around working hours for students. We have a policy whereby Memorial is the employer, how many hours as a student you can work. And then there's also the matter of what makes a full-time graduate student a full-time graduate student. And in the university calendar, a full-time graduate student is defined as somebody who works no more than 24 hours a week. And that's meant to be 24 hours total, right? The idea is that if you're pursuing a graduate level studies on a full-time basis, you should be devoting your full-time attention, right, to those studies. So even though you might be able to work more than 20 hours a week off campus, as a full-time graduate student, there is that policy that you shouldn't work anymore or can't work any more than 24 hours a week. So that's one thing to consider, is how does this work in terms of Memorial's definition of your ability to work? The second thing is, even though you may be able to work more hours, keep in mind that your primary purpose in Canada is to study, right? And it can be very challenging to balance that much work and those demands from an employer. It's hard to say no sometimes, when you want to make a good impression and those sort of things. But in the end, if all that work starts to negatively impact you on your studies, then it jeopardizes so many other things, right? If you have to be on suspension because of poor academic performance, because there wasn't a lot of time devoted to studies, then that's it. And not to say that that will happen, but just a word of caution that, check in with yourself, what you're willing and able to do, and make sure that you don't kind of put that in jeopardy. All right. So now that we've talked a good bit about work, we'll go on to this tricky quiz about work authorization. So we'll hand it over to Arif.
Very, very tricky. But before we go on the Twin Falls, I want to announce the results so far. Ghana 2, Nigeria 2, Peru 1, and Iran 1. So, people, this is one of the few quizzes that left. So if you really want the trophy, the way I hope that you want, then please participate. So, first question, undergraduate students can work full-time during their scheduled break. Nigeria said yes. Yes, undergraduate students can work full-time during scheduled break. That is true. Nigeria is now 3. Question number 2. Graduate students do not have any scheduled breaks and as a result cannot work more than 20 hours off campus during their program of study. True or false? Ruth says false. Sri Lanka says true. Peru says true. False. Well, it's a tricky one. It's both true and then again false. It's true in the sense that, it is the regulation. But again, there is the temporary public policy that you have to take into consideration. Even though you qualify for the temporary public policy, you will also have to get authorization from the School of Graduate Studies. So I will say this is true for this instance, but there are exceptions. So although it's a tricky question, so Sri Lanka gets the goal for this one. So Sri Lanka won. First goal for Sri Lanka, yay! Now next one is part-time students are eligible to work. Is it true or false? False. Oh, Iran scored so well. It is false. Yes, part-time students, even if you are, qualified for the public policy, you're not even, qualified under public policy, temporary public policy. So part-time students, you're not eligible to work, except in your last semester of studies. So in your last semester of studies, if you're only left with the courses that you're left with, and you have to be part-time, and it's for undergraduate students, of course. because graduate students' part-time and full-time status does not depend on the number of courses you are taking, but graduate students, it does. In your final semester of studies, you can be a part-time student. So who got that? I forgot. Oh, Iran got it. Iran got it. Iran won. Now, number 4, students who are on leave, authorized or unauthorized, are not eligible to work on and off campus. True or false? Iran, true. Fatima is killing it. Fatima got another score for Iran. Now Iran is almost 3. Not almost 3. Iran is 3. And the final one for this round: all study permit holders are eligible for temporary public policy. True or false? Sri Lanka says false, and it is false. Sri Lanka scored 2. That's amazing. But this round was won by Iran by 3. Okay. Next slide.
That's great. All right. So there are other types of work authorization. So we talked about the work authorization that is part of your study permit. Now we want to talk about two other types of work authorization that come in the form of a separate permit. So first is the co-op work permit, and then we'll talk about the postgraduate work permit. So a co-op work permit is a work permit that is required if your program of study includes some type of work experience component as part of the curriculum. Now that work experience part of your program might be referred to as a co-op. It might also be referred to as a work term. It could be referred to as a placement. It might be an internship, right? So different programs of study will call it different things depending on the nature of the type of work experience and whether it's paid or not paid. So even if it's not paid, if it is part of your studies and it is a work component, then you need work authorization in order to undertake that work experience as part of your program. Typically, the work authorization you have as part of your study permit does not cover a co-op. Okay, so the vast majority of cases, you need a separate document called a co-op work permit before you can even begin that work placement. And to apply for that co-op work permit, you might have applied with your initial study permit, because when you set up your study permit application, it will ask you the question, is work a required, like, do you also want to apply for a work permit? You can choose to also submit an application for a co-op work permit. And along with that, you present an additional letter confirming that this work placement is a requirement for you to graduate. So sometimes that happens with the initial study permit application, in which case when you enter Canada, you should get the study permit plus the co-op work permit. But if you didn't apply, or if that co-op work permit wasn't issued, then once you are in Canada, you can make an application for the co-op work permit. You need to have a valid study permit, and you need a letter from your department or the co-op office within your faculty that confirms that these work requirements are a requirement for you to graduate. It's a relatively straightforward application. There's also no cost to it. Okay, so if you have a work term or a work component to your program, and you don't get your co-op work permit when you come into Canada, make sure you apply once you are here. All right, and you apply online, and we can certainly help you with that. So we recommend that everybody apply for that co-op work permit, but there are two situations whereby if you don't have that co-op work permit, you may be able to begin or finish your co-op placement without having the co-op work permit. So based on the work authorization of your study permit. So as I mentioned, the normal process of things is that you can't begin your work term until you have the co-op work permit. But there are two temporary policies, essentially, that have been introduced that you might qualify for, which means that you could begin your co-op placement without having the co-op work permit. The first is the temporary public policy, which we just finished talking about, right? And that temporary public policy, if you're eligible, doesn't restrict the number of hours you can work off campus. And as part of that temporary public policy, IRCC has said, you know, if you're eligible for this temporary public policy and your co-op placement can be completed within the timeline of the temporary public policy, then you don't need to have a co-op work permit to do that work placement. So if you're eligible, if your co-op placement can be completed before December 31st, 2023, or the expiry date of your current study permit, whichever comes first, then you don't need to have the co-op work permit. Okay. There's a second temporary policy that exists as well, and this is a temporary policy that was part of kind of a package of temporary policies that IRCC introduced throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's many temporary policies that they've introduced, and one of them, as it relates to a co-op work permit, has said that as long as you've applied for your co-op work permit, you can begin your work placement even if you haven't received that co-op work permit based on the work authorization as part of your study permit. So because it's taking them about 6 months to process a co-op work permit, they're letting you begin your placement if they're just taking too long, to process it. But that temporary policy is set to expire March 31st of this year. Okay, so there can be a couple of these instances where you don't need to have the co-op work permit to either begin or finish your placement, but we advise you anyway to apply for it. It's free. It's a relatively straightforward application, and we can definitely help you with that. So a short quiz, I guess, on the co-op work permit.
Yeah, let's see. Now, just let you know, Iran is leading the game on 4, Nigeria is 3, Ghana is 2, Sri Lanka is 2, and Peru is 1. So, first question. To obtain a co-op work permit, you must be in a program where co-op is mandatory part of the studies. True or false? Ghana, true, and the answer is true. So Ghana got in 3. Next question. Co-op work permit cost $500. Is it true or false? Ghana says false. Yes, it is false. Ruth is killing it for Ghana. Last one. I am eligible for a co-op work permit if I find my own internship. True or false? True. Nigeria says true. Bangladesh finally scored. Yes, yes, number 3 is false. Oh my God, Tawfiq Ahmed, you must come and meet with me. 1 score for Bangladesh, and that is it. And joking aside, I love you all equally. No, so you are not eligible for co-op work permit if you find your own internship. Co-op work permit is only given when your co-op is mandatory part of your studies.
Okay. All right, so now we'll move on to talk about a postgraduate work permit, or a PGWP. So your co-op work permit and your work authorization as a student is important for you now. Your postgrad work permit is not something you can apply for until after you've completed your program. But it's important to have some knowledge and understanding about this program, because if it is something that you want to take advantage of when you finish your program, you have to ensure that you complete your program in a way that helps maintain your eligibility for this. Okay, so it's not like every study permit holder or every graduate of Memorial is going to get a postgrad work permit. You have to meet certain eligibility criteria. Okay. Now, some of the eligibility criteria that you should be mindful of now is that the program that you complete has to be at least an 8-month-long program. Now, fortunately, there's no program at Memorial that you would be admitted to that would be less than 8 months that would lead towards a degree, diploma, or certificate. So you've all kind of met that one already. You also have to be a full-time student continuously, other than your scheduled break, or if you only have like a course or 2 left in your last semester, right? It's okay to be part-time as an undergrad student. So that means during every regular academic semester period, so every fall, every winter for undergrad students, every fall, every winter and spring for our graduate students, you have to be continuously full-time. There are a couple of exceptions, like I said, being part-time in your last semester and some approve leave of absences for 150 days or less for valid reasons like medical and that sort of thing. So, if you're ever drop and you're a part-time student, if you have an extended gap in your studies, or even a gap without that authorized leave, then you could be ineligible for a post-grad work permit. Okay. And it's important that you maintain compliance too with the conditions of your study permit so that you do actively pursue your studies. All right. So these are important to understand now, so you make every effort to be full-time, and also you need to ensure that the studies that you're taking are in person for the most part. That's something that we haven't written on the slide, but is another important factor, because to be eligible for a post-grad work permit, you have to do more than 50% of your studies in person. So online studies, can impact your eligibility for a post-grad as well. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why, if something happens and you have this unexpected change to your enrollment status, you're no longer full-time, it is important to consult with us so you can understand what the potential immigration implications are. And as you can see from this presentation, because we've talked about being full-time so much, there are impacts to your post-grad work permit eligibility, and impacts as well to your work authorization as a student. So if you're ever unsure, about your post-grad work permit eligibility, then you can certainly attend, our sessions, and we host one on the post-grad work permit pretty regularly. All right, so short quiz on the PGWP.
Thank you, Natasha. So, Nigeria and Ghana, you're very close of winning the trophy. Sorry, Iran and Ghana are very close to winning the trophy. Nigeria is just behind, and then Sri Lanka is 2, Peru and Bangladesh 1-1. Now, first one, post-graduation work permit is an open work permit. True or false? Sri Lanka says true, and it is true. Sri Lanka 3. Uh, um, Next one is post-graduation work permit is an one-time opportunity. True or false? Ghana says true. It's true. Yes, it is true. And final question. To obtain PGWP, student must be continuously full-time student, except during their scheduled break. True or false? True, BD. BD got the one. Second score for Bangladesh. Yes, to obtain PGWP, student must be continuously full-time student except during their scheduled break and their last semester of studies. Of course, if you go for a one-term leave of absence for graduate students, exception can be made. But if you're planning for a leave of absence, graduate students, you should consult with the immigration advising team.
Perfect.
Natasha, over to
I
you.
think we have one quiz left, but we'll get there. Okay. So we don't have, I guess, too much else to go through before we get to our question and answer. But as you can see, there's a lot of important things to know about your immigration status as an international student. And it's really important that you have good information. And you'll find a lot of information about immigration online, especially, but not all of it, I would say, is credible or reliable. It's really important that you ensure that the information you're getting is good information. So I would recommend, if you're looking online for information, that you take it directly from the Government of Canada's website, from the Department of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, and you can access that through cic.gc.ca, or if you go to canada.ca and choose the Immigration and Citizenship section. So there's a lot of information on their website, and so that's where you should be going to get immigration information, not reposted information from another party's website. Now, there is a lot of information there, and of course, that information can cause you to have more questions, might be tricky to navigate or to interpret. And so the role that we play as your immigration advising team and as regulated immigration consultants is to interpret that information for you based on our training and based on our experience. So in Canada, it is against the Immigration Act, so it's against the law actually, to give immigration advice unless you are a regulated consultant or if you're an immigration lawyer. So lawyers are regulated through the law societies in the province where they practice, and lawyers can have different specialties. So you'll find lawyers who have specialization in immigration. But if it's an immigration consultant, then they are regulated by one body only, and that is the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants. So you can go to that regulatory body's website and you can search and look up a consultant to find out, are they in good standing with the college, right? Do they have any complaints against them? Are they suspended? And you'll find all three of us listed there if you go have a look. So it's important that if you're asking somebody a question about immigration, that you ensure that they are somebody who is authorized to give that information, right? So that they are a regulated consultant. And we at the university are there to provide you with that advice related to your study permits, right? Of course, there are consultants external to the university, that you can consult with and charge a fee for service, but we're here for you as regulated consultants without having to pay that fee. So we are the immigration advising team, and that's how you can connect with us. All right. Reef, I think this is the last one.
The last one, in Ghana, Nigeria, and Iran, you were very close, very, very close. So the first one, my friends and family are the best source of information when it comes to immigration. True or false? Ghana says false, and it is false. Yes, your friends and family, unless they are Abu Arif, Natasha Clark, and Danai Belanger, are not the best source of information. Uh, um, I think one of your audio is on. I'm going to mute you. Please keep yourself muted so that other can hear us better. Next one is, it is illegal to provide immigration advice without having appropriate license and authorization. True and false? Sri Lanka says true. Yes, true. It is illegal to provide. But the trophy goes to Ghana. Ghana won by 6, and Iran was in 5, and Nigeria was 3. So that ends our true and false FIFA trophy for winter 2023.
Excellent. Okay. Just a few more slides here. So this is a slide really to bring awareness to scams and fraud. So there are a lot of scams out there, of course, and many of the scams are targeted around immigration scams, scams to get your social insurance number, and scams to come from like Canada Border Services Agency. And these, can be particularly, I think, targeting students and can be of concern when you have somebody who's calling you to say, I'm from CBSA and you'll be detained if you don't share with us this information, right? Or threat deportation, or people saying they're from the Canada Revenue Agency, which is the government department that deals with income tax and tax returns. So we just want to take an opportunity to raise your awareness about this, and it is quite prevalent, especially fraud around kind of these areas. So do the best you can, to protect yourself from fraud. Use unique passwords. Don't be so willing to give your personal information. Ask, questions. Be suspicious. And there's certain things that you really should never share, right, with anybody. And in your social insurance number, or your client ID with immigration, like those are kinds of things that really should only be given to certain individuals, right? Your employer with the Canada Revenue Agency, maybe your bank, and that sort of thing. But they can be very highly linked to identity theft. And the government of Canada will never ask for your details over the phone, right? And CBSA is not going to call you like that. IRCC or CRA is not going to call you like that and seek out those informations. And sometimes these scammers can be very sophisticated, and they say they're calling from the government of Canada, they can even change their phone numbers to look like it's coming from a local phone number. So it is really important, you know, to just be aware of that as a new student, and to just think critically about these things, and to avoid giving your personal details, right? When somebody is just contacting you out of the blue like that. We will ask you as well at the end of our session to please complete our feedback form. It will help us to learn from you about ways we can improve. If you found this information helpful and clear, it's just a few short questions. So, you know, Arif will put that link in the chat, but before I forget, I just want to mention that we want to do that. And before we go on to questions, I want to let you guys know about other ways outside of this session that you can connect with us if you have a question. So we are all available for one-on-one consultations. Our appointments happen primarily virtually through this system called WebEx, and you can view our availability through a program called Navigate for Students. So it's an app you can download, or you can access it through a desktop web browser, and you can go in there on login with your my.mun.ca credentials, and you can see our availability and book an appointment, you know, that works for you. As I mentioned, they are virtual. If you do want to meet in person, you can email immigrationadvising@mun.ca, let us know your appointment time, and if we can accommodate an in-person appointment, we certainly will, and we'll let you know. Our appointments tend to book up, you know, a week or 2 weeks in advance, but we have appointments available every day, and each of us do. And so if you can't get an appointment, you can certainly come to our virtual drop-in hours. So we will host them starting not today, but on Friday. So from Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, typically every week from 11 to 1. We have virtual drop-in hours, and if you go to our website, mun.ca/international, and click on the immigration advising section, you'll see the link there to enter into the advisor's WebEx room. And basically, it's drop-in, so you enter into a virtual waiting area, and we admit one student at a time during the 2-hour sessions. And we also host regular information sessions through our course shell and Brightspace, and so that schedule's on our website as well. Okay, so thank you so much on behalf of Arif and Denai and myself for your attention. We do have lots of time, and we'll get into some questions, but I'm just going to ask Bahar, before we get into the questions, to